It's 2:17 a.m., your room is dark, your phone is glowing, and there's a message you've typed, then erased, then typed again. You put the phone face down, like it can't see you hesitating. And somewhere in that quiet, a small question drifts in. When did I stop trusting myself like I used to? Because here's the strange part. Nothing dramatic happened. No big failure. No public collapse. So why does your confidence feel thinner lately? Quieter, almost fragile? That question, the why, is the thread we're going to gently pull tonight, and it doesn't unravel all at once. Confidence erosion doesn't announce itself. It doesn't crash through your life like a storm. It slips in softly. Through habits so small they feel harmless, almost invisible. Think about your mornings. The alarm goes off, you hit snooze, once, twice, maybe 3 times. A tiny voice whispers, you should get up. Another voice answers, 5 more minutes won't matter. And it doesn't. Not today. But something subtle happens when you ignore yourself. You feel it, don't you? Not consciously, more like a faint internal dimming. A signal sent and unanswered. That's where it begins. Later you replay a conversation from yesterday. Something you said. Something you didn't. You scroll through it again while brushing your teeth, while walking, while lying in bed. You imagine alternate versions where you sounded smarter, calmer, more confident. You don't even notice the habit forming. Overthinking feels productive, responsible, like you're protecting yourself. But here's the quiet mystery. Why does thinking more often lead to trusting yourself less? Confidence erosion through small daily self-sabotaging habits isn't about weakness. It's about sensitivity. It's about people who feel deeply, think deeply, and live a lot of their life inside their own mind. If you watched the previous video on high intelligence paired with emotional loneliness, you might remember this feeling. That strange split where your inner world is rich, complex, alive, but the outer world feels harder to step into. This topic sits right next to that one. Not the same story, but the same nervous system. Picture a quiet room, a chair, a mirror. You avoid eye contact with yourself while washing your hands. Why? You open messages and don't reply. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much. You want to say the right thing. So you say nothing. Later, silence becomes the message, and the loop tightens. Here's the part most people miss. Every time you hesitate instead of act, your mind learns something. It learns that your thoughts are safer than your choices. It learns that delay equals protection. It learns that shrinking slightly feels better than risking being seen. No single moment breaks your confidence. It's the accumulation. Late nights where you promise yourself, tomorrow I'll be different. Unread messages that turn into days. Avoided eye contact that becomes a habit. Scrolling instead of starting. Thinking instead of moving. And underneath it all, a very soft, very dangerous belief begins to form. I don't follow through. You don't say it out loud. You don't even fully think it, but you feel it. Confidence erosion loves ambiguity. It grows in the spaces where nothing technically goes wrong. Let me ask you something, gently. How many times this week did you almost speak and didn't? Almost reach out and stopped yourself? Almost trust your first instinct and then overruled it? Those almost matter. There's a moment late at night. Maybe you know it, when the world is quiet enough for honesty to slip in. You're alone. The phone light reflects in your eyes. And you think, I used to be more sure of myself. What changed? Not your intelligence. Not your values. Not your depth. What changed is that your inner critic got more airtime than your inner signal. Overthinkers don't lack intuition. They drown it. Every small self-sabotaging habit sends the same message. Pause. Wait. Double check. You might be wrong. And again, one pause doesn't hurt, but hundreds of them do. Confidence erosion is cumulative. You stop trusting your memory, then your tone, then your reactions, then your desires. Eventually, even joy feels suspicious, like it needs to be justified. This connects back to that earlier conversation about emotional loneliness. Because when you don't trust yourself, connection feels risky. You're not just afraid of rejection, you're afraid of misreading yourself. So you stay quiet, observant, safe, alone with very loud thoughts. Here's a small but important open loop to hold on to. Confidence isn't built by success. It's built by self-consistency. And every tiny broken promise, staying up too late again, avoiding the thing again, choosing comfort over alignment again, quietly chips at that consistency. No guilt, no drama, just erosion. Sometimes it shows up as exhaustion without effort. Sometimes as envy toward people who seem effortless. Sometimes as that hollow feeling after you scroll for an hour and can't remember why you opened the app. And still you function. You smile. You think deeply. You care. Which is why this is so hard to notice. There's a moment, maybe tomorrow morning, where you'll catch yourself hesitating over something small. A message. A decision. A step forward. And here's the unanswered question I want to leave you with tonight. What if confidence erosion isn't about becoming less, but about slowly learning to doubt the parts of you that were always trying to guide you? We'll keep pulling that thread. There's a moment most people barely notice, but it happens more often than anyone wants to admit. A feeling rises. Quiet, quick, almost shy. It's not loud enough to demand attention. It doesn't come with certainty or proof. It's just a subtle internal nudge. A sense that you should speak, move, stop, start, or choose differently. And almost immediately, something else steps in and overrides it. Logic, politeness, fear of misreading the situation, fear of being wrong. So you ignore the signal and move on, telling yourself it didn't matter anyway. At first, it truly feels insignificant. One ignored instinct doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like maturity, like self-control, like being reasonable. You tell yourself you're being careful, thoughtful, measured, and the world often rewards that. No conflict, no awkwardness, no visible consequence. The moment passes quietly, leaving no evidence behind, which is exactly why it's dangerous. Because inside, something registers. The mind is always learning from patterns, not from outcomes. It doesn't need drama to form conclusions. It only needs repetition. When a signal arises and you ignore it, the mind takes note. When this happens again, it takes stronger note. Slowly, without announcement, a rule begins to form. Inner signals are optional, questionable, not urgent, not reliable enough to act on. The next time the signal appears, it's weaker, quieter, less confident, and this time ignoring it feels even easier. This is how the erosion begins, not with a collapse, but with a whisper being dismissed too many times. Inner signals aren't always logical. They don't present spreadsheets. They don't argue their case. They arrive as sensations. Tension in the chest, a tightening in the throat, a sudden clarity followed by doubt. They don't explain themselves, and that makes them inconvenient in a world that values justification. So you learn to wait for certainty. But certainty rarely comes first. Action does. Every time you delay in search of reassurance, you teach your mind that hesitation is the correct response. You teach it that movement requires permission. Over time, this creates a subtle hierarchy inside you, where analysis outranks intuition, and instinct becomes something you consult last, if at all. And yet, the instinct doesn't disappear. It just retreats. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from this. Not physical, not even emotional in the obvious sense. It's the tiredness of carrying too many unexpressed impulses, too many stopped thoughts, too many moments where something inside wanted to move, and you held it back. That energy doesn't vanish. It turns inward. This is why people who ignore their inner signals often feel mentally crowded. Their minds are loud, but their actions are minimal. Thoughts pile up because they have nowhere to go. Expression is postponed. Decisions are deferred. And the mind compensates by thinking more, planning more, revisiting more. Not because it's productive, but because it's trying to resolve unfinished internal motion. Over time, a quiet mistrust forms. Not toward the world, but toward the self. You start double-checking your reactions. You replay conversations to see if your feelings were valid. You hesitate before committing to even small preferences. What you want to eat, where you want to go. Whether you actually like something or just think you should. Choice becomes effortful. This isn't because you lack self-awareness. It's because you've trained yourself to override it. Ignoring small inner signals teaches the mind that your internal world doesn't have authority, that it needs external confirmation to be real. So you begin to look outward for cues on how to feel, what to want, when to act. The more you do this, the less weight your inner voice carries. And eventually, when you need it most, it doesn't speak up with the same strength. There's a subtle grief in realizing this. A sense that something once natural now feels distant. Like trying to remember a language you used to speak fluently, but haven't practiced in years. The words are there, somewhere, but they don't come when you call for them. Confidence doesn't disappear all at once. It thins. It becomes conditional. You feel confident only after reassurance, only after approval, only after success confirms that you were right to act. Spontaneous confidence, the kind that comes from self-trust, becomes rare. And the irony is that the signals you ignore are often the most accurate ones. Not because they're perfect, but because they're honest. They reflect your real boundaries, your real interests, your real discomforts. When you silence them, you don't become more adaptable. You become disconnected. There's a moment when this shows up clearly. Someone asks you what you want. Not in a big, life-altering way, just casually. And your mind goes blank. Not because you don't have preferences, but because you've learned not to listen for them. You scan for the right answer instead of the true one. You offer something neutral, easy, safe. Each time this happens, the lesson reinforces itself. Your mind concludes that inner signals aren't useful data, that they complicate things, that ignoring them keeps life smoother. And in the short term, it does. But in the long term, it costs you something essential. Self-trust isn't built by grand acts of courage. It's built by honoring the smallest internal cues. By responding when something inside says yes, and especially when it says no. When those cues are consistently dismissed, confidence erodes not because you fail, but because you stop showing yourself that you're worth listening to. The most unsettling part is how normal this feels. There's no alarm, no clear moment where you can say this is where it started. Just a gradual shift where you become less certain, less decisive, less connected to your own sense of direction. And because it happens quietly, you often blame yourself for the symptoms without recognizing the cause. The cause isn't that you don't know who you are. It's that you've been teaching yourself, one small moment at a time, not to respond when who you are tries to speak. Emotional sensitivity often starts as a strength long before it becomes a question mark. It's the ability to notice shifts in tone, pauses between words, changes in energy in a room. It's feeling when something is slightly off before anyone else says it out loud. Early on, this sensitivity feels like insight. You pick up on nuance. You understand subtext. You read between the lines instinctively. And because of that, you learn early that you can sense things others miss. But sensitivity doesn't exist in isolation. It exists inside patterns. At some point, sensitivity stops being just awareness and starts becoming responsibility. You don't just notice moods, you feel accountable for them. You don't just sense discomfort. You assume it might be because of you. A quiet shift in someone's voice becomes something to analyze. A delayed response becomes something to interpret. And because you feel deeply, you assume deeply. The repetition begins subtly. One moment of second guessing doesn't create self-doubt. It feels thoughtful, empathetic, considerate. You replay a conversation and ask yourself if you were too much, too quiet, too intense, too distant. You tell yourself you're just trying to understand. And again, nothing explodes, no immediate consequence, which makes it easy to do it again. Sensitivity paired with reflection looks like maturity on the surface. But sensitivity paired with constant self-correction slowly rewires the way you see yourself. Each time you reinterpret your emotional reaction as a potential flaw, you take a small step away from trusting it. Each time you tell yourself that your feelings might be an overreaction, you subtly demote them. Not invalid enough to ignore completely, but not solid enough to stand on. So you hover in uncertainty. Emotionally sensitive people often learn early that their feelings are intense. Sometimes they're told directly, sometimes indirectly, through reactions, raised eyebrows, silence, or jokes. Over time, you internalize the idea that feeling deeply requires management, that your inner world needs monitoring. That emotional restraint equals safety. So you begin filtering yourself. You feel something, then immediately evaluate whether it's appropriate to feel it. You notice discomfort, then ask if you're being unfair. You sense distance, then wonder if you imagined it. And the more this cycle repeats, the more your emotional clarity blurs. What once felt like intuition starts to feel unreliable. The mind adapts to repetition faster than to truth. If every emotional response is followed by doubt, the mind learns that emotions are suspect. Not wrong, exactly, but questionable, in need of verification. So instead of using feelings as information, you use them as prompts for analysis. And analysis rarely leads to confidence. This is where sensitivity quietly transforms into self-doubt. Not because sensitivity is flawed, but because it's been placed under constant surveillance. You start asking yourself questions that never fully resolve. Was I too sensitive, or was that actually hurtful? Am I intuitive, or am I projecting? Did I read that correctly, or am I making it about me? These questions don't have clear answers, and the lack of resolution trains your nervous system to stay alert, to keep scanning, to stay slightly tense. Over time, you begin to trust external reactions more than your internal experience. You look for confirmation in facial expressions, tone, timing, response length. You measure your reality against other people's behavior. And when there's ambiguity, which there often is, you default to self-blame. Not dramatically, quietly. This doesn't feel like insecurity at first. It feels like awareness, like depth, like emotional intelligence. But the repetition matters. When every feeling is interrogated, emotional safety erodes. You no longer feel anchored in your own responses. You float above them, observing, correcting, revising. And something strange happens. You become less expressive, not because you feel less, but because expression feels risky. You've learned that feelings can be misinterpreted, dismissed, or turned against you. So you soften them before they leave your mouth. You round the edges. You add disclaimers. You say things like, maybe I'm just overthinking, or it's probably nothing, before anyone else can. This self-editing becomes automatic. Sensitivity that once connected you to others now distances you from yourself. You're aware of everything, but grounded in nothing. You feel deeply, but trust shallowly. And the longer this pattern repeats, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between intuition and insecurity. Repetition is the key here. One instance of doubt doesn't change identity, but repeated doubt shapes self-perception. If every emotional response is followed by questioning, the underlying belief forms naturally: my feelings need correction. My reactions need adjustment. My instincts need supervision. That belief doesn't announce itself. It shows up as hesitation, as checking in with others before deciding, as replaying interactions late at night, as mentally rehearsing emotional responses in advance. You try to predict how you'll feel, how others will feel, how it will all land. And in doing so, you move further away from the original signal. Emotionally sensitive people often sense shifts before they can explain them. That used to feel like clarity. Now it feels like a liability. You second guess not because you lack insight, but because you've been trained to doubt the accuracy of that insight, especially if it leads to discomfort, confrontation, or change. So you wait. You gather more data. You tell yourself you'll know for sure later, but later rarely comes. There's always another variable, another interpretation, another possibility that keeps you suspended. Self-doubt doesn't need criticism to grow. It needs repetition without resolution. Each unresolved emotional moment reinforces the habit of questioning instead of trusting. And gradually, sensitivity, which once made you feel connected and perceptive, begins to feel heavy, like something you need to manage rather than honor. You still feel everything. That never goes away. But the relationship to those feelings shifts. They become something you watch from a distance, unsure whether to step closer or pull back, unsure whether they're guiding you or misleading you, unsure whether listening will lead to clarity or consequence. And that uncertainty starts to feel familiar. Like the default state, like the safest place to stand.